A bitter billionaire caught his maid dancing. His next move left everyone speechless. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. The Croft estate was less a home and more a museum of a life that had ceased to be lived. Sprawling atop the city like a glass and steel fortress, it was a monument to the monumental success of its sole occupant, Julian Croft. Every surface gleamed with a cold, impersonal perfection. Priceless paintings hung on the walls, their vibrant colors muted by the mansion's cavernous silence. Sculptures stood like ghosts in the hallways. It was a space meticulously curated to display wealth, but it pulsed with an emptiness so profound it felt like a physical presence. Julian Croft, the billionaire architect of this gilded tomb, moved through its spaces like a shadow. Grief had hollowed him out, leaving behind a man made of sharp angles and a bitter, impenetrable silence. 2 years had passed since he'd lost his wife, Amelia, and in that time, he had systematically sealed off every source of light and joy, convinced he deserved neither. His world had shrunk to the bitter confines of his study, the rattle of ice in a whiskey glass, and the glow of stock market tickers that charted a fortune he no longer cared about. Into this sterile, joyless world stepped Ilara. She was a new hire from a high-end cleaning service, a quiet young woman with eyes that held a depth of spirit that was entirely at odds with her surroundings. To Julian, when he noticed her at all, she was just a uniform, a pair of hands meant to maintain the soulless perfection of his mausoleum. He didn't see the worn-out soles of her comfortable shoes, a silent testament to long hours and longer commutes. He didn't know that every dollar she earned was meticulously budgeted, a lifeline for her younger sister's education, a dream she was determined to keep alive even if it meant sacrificing her own. Ilara, for her part, was an expert in invisibility. She learned the geography of the house's silence, the rhythm of its owner's brooding. She cleaned with a diligent grace, her movements efficient and unobtrusive. But unlike the house, she was not empty. Within her was a secret, vibrant world, a place of music and movement that she carried as a quiet rebellion against the hardships of her life. It was a world no one in this cold, sad house could ever imagine. Julian's grief was a restless creature, and it rarely let him sleep. Most nights, he would find himself wandering the dark, silent corridors of his own life, a ghost haunting the scenes of his former happiness. The mansion at night was even more oppressive, the silence somehow louder, the shadows deeper. It was on one such night, as he stood before a floor-to-ceiling window watching the distant, indifferent lights of the city, that he heard it. It was faint, a barely perceptible thread of sound in the absolute quiet. It was music, not the classical dirges that sometimes emanated from the house's state-of-the-art sound system, but something else. A melody with a heartbeat, a rhythm full of life. Curiosity, an emotion he hadn't felt in years, stirred within him. He followed the sound, his soft leather slippers making no noise on the polished marble floors. It led him down a long hall he hadn't walked in 2 years, towards the grand ballroom. The doors were closed, but not fully. A thin sliver of soft light escaped from within. He pushed the door open a few more inches, just enough to see inside. The ballroom had been Amelia's favorite place, a space designed for light and laughter, but had been kept dark and silent since her death, a sealed-off chamber of his heart. But it wasn't dark now. A single lamp in the corner cast a warm, gentle glow across the vast, empty floor. And in the center of that light was Ilara. She was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and leggings, not her uniform. Thin white wires ran from her ears to a small, old MP3 player clutched in her hand. She was dancing. She was not performing. She was not practicing a routine. She was simply moving, lost in a way that was so pure and unself-conscious it was breathtaking. Her body told a story, each turn, each leap, each sweep of her arms a sentence, in a language of profound emotion. There was struggle in her movements, but also a soaring, defiant joy. It was a dance of resilience, of a spirit that refused to be broken. Julian stood frozen in the doorway, a silent, unseen audience to this secret, sacred rite. The sight pierced through the thick armor of his bitterness, a shard of pure, unadulterated life lodging itself somewhere deep inside him. He watched, unable to look away, as this young woman, this anonymous maid, filled the loneliest room in his world with more beauty and soul than all his priceless art combined. He retreated before she could see him, closing the ballroom door with a quiet click that sounded like a vault sealing a newfound treasure. Back in the cold darkness of his study, the image of her dance replayed in his mind, a vibrant, disruptive ghost. His first instinct, the one honed by 2 years of bitter isolation, was to be angry. It was a violation, a trespass into his sacred space. He should call the agency in the morning. He should have her dismissed. But as he poured a drink, his hand trembled. It wasn't anger he felt. It was something else, something terrifyingly unfamiliar. It was a flicker of warmth in the frozen landscape of his heart. He did not fire her. The next day, he found himself watching her, not as an employer overseeing a servant, but as a secret observer of a mystery. He saw things he had never noticed before. He saw the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, but also the resolute set of her jaw. During her lunch break, he saw her through his office window, sitting on a bench in the garden, not eating, but meticulously stitching the ribbons back onto a pair of battered, worn-out point shoes she had pulled from her bag. They were old, the satin frayed, the toes scuffed and soft, clearly cherished and repaired 100 times over. His gaze fell upon a heavy coffee table book in his study, one he hadn't touched in years, The Great Ballets, a history in photographs. The next morning, he placed down a console table in the main gallery, a spot he knew she had to dust meticulously every day. It was a clumsy, indirect gesture, a message in a bottle cast into the silent sea of his own home. He watched later from a security monitor as she paused at her work, her fingers tracing the image of a prima ballerina on the cover. A look of such profound, wistful longing crossed her face that it made his chest ache. Meanwhile, the rigid order of the house continued under the watchful eye of Mrs. Gable, his head housekeeper. She was a woman who worshipped routine and saw emotion as a form of mess. She reprimanded Alara for being a few minutes late back from her break, her voice sharp and cold. "This is the Croft estate, not a community center," she'd said. "Punctuality is a reflection of character." Julian, overhearing from his study, felt a surge of irrational irritation at the woman's petty tyranny. For the first time, he saw the oppressive weight of the world he had created, and he saw Alara quietly absorbing it, her dignity an invisible shield against the chill. Another week passed. The secret rituals continued. Julian's late-night wanderings now had a destination, the sliver of light under the ballroom door. He became a connoisseur of her stolen dances, watching as she poured out her frustrations, her hopes, and her dreams onto the polished floor. He learned her moods by the tempo of her chosen music, the ferocity or gentleness of her movements. The silence in him was no longer absolute. It was punctuated by the ghost of a melody, the memory of a perfect pirouette. He couldn't continue being a passive observer. The disconnect between the artist in the ballroom and the maid scrubbing his floors was becoming too vast, too absurd. He had to bridge it. He waited for her one afternoon as she was finishing her duties, her cleaning cart parked beside her. He emerged from his study, and she immediately stiffened, her eyes dropping to the floor, expecting a reprimand. "Alara," he said. Her name felt strange on his tongue. She looked up, startled that he even knew it. "Yes, Mr. Croft?" "The ballroom," he stated, his voice more blunt and awkward than he intended. What was that? Fear flooded her face. Her skin went pale. This was it. She was going to be fired for trespassing, for dancing in the dead queen's court. Her sister's tuition, the rent, the fragile stability she had fought so hard for. It was all about to crumble. I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I know I shouldn't have. The door was open, and I'll never do it again. Please, I need this job." Her panic was so raw, so genuine, it disarmed him. He held up a hand. "I'm not going to fire you," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "I'm asking a question. Where did you learn to do that?" Her fears subsided slightly. replaced